It's funny. If you look back at the conversations that people were having about retail, maybe a year and a half, a couple of years ago, the headlines were not very good. People were using words like retail apocalypse, and they were talking about the death of retail. Brick and mortar is dead, and all of that. And the headlines were really trumpeting bad news. Well, you fast forward now here a couple of years later, and the tone really couldn't be more different. Today, we're seeing what we would say is a resurgence of retail, a reemergence of brick and mortar. Certainly after a period of retrenchment, a period after they cutting some stores and banners that perhaps weren't working any longer. But in effect, what we're seeing today is a return of relevance, really, for brick and mortar. And you see that in the numbers. If you're looking at comp numbers over the past 12 months, you see it in large boxes everywhere. Everyone from the larger formats down to the smaller formats, we're seeing this resurgence. So a very different tone today. And I think I would attribute that to a number of things, and we can talk about them if you'd like. But I think the first thing I would say is that retailers today, the retailers that remain, are really much more differentiated than they had been in the past. They've really tended to focus on what is the equity of the banner that they've got and what is the real message they're trying to deliver to consumers, and not trying to be all things to all people. So differentiation. The second, I think, is a bigger emphasis on convenience. I think this notion of recognizing that the shopper doesn't really have time any longer to be going up and down every single aisle and doing what we used to call a stock-up trip. And so really emphasizing the degree to which the shopper today is time-starved and really needs to maximize the time that they've got. So a focus on convenience. Third would be an emphasis on private label. I think new private labels have come into the marketplace over the past year or so that are really changing the game and changing shoppers' perception of what it is to be a private label. And then finally, the other element I think that's driving this really what we call retail re-emerging theme, I think, is the degree to which digital today is being integrated into stores in ways that's driving a much more dynamic and interactive environment. And that is really driving what we would say today is a brick and mortar narrative that is distinct from what we had seen in the past. All of that, perhaps doom and gloom conversation, you really don't hear much of that any longer. I think for shoppers today, I think retailers have really recognized that it isn't so much that they have, say, less time. We all have the same 24 hours in the day. Mm-hmm. It's not so much that, it's that the time that people have today is in shorter little bursts, shorter fragments today. And so they need retailers ultimately to be responding to the fact that they've got maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes here, or they've got 20 minutes between destinations. So they're no longer going to be thinking in terms of doing a large, full kinds of trip. They're going to do multiple smaller trips. And the way I think to think about that for today for the shopper is this notion that they need a better return on their time investment. Okay, that in effect becomes an asset that they have. And they're looking to say, where can I get the biggest value for the time that I'm investing in the store? From a retailer's perspective, what that's going to mean is focusing, yes, on how to make the store more productive. And gosh, in this environment where there aren't going to be as many new stores being built, the focus then moves to the store itself and how to make comps really drive volume. So in that environment where the shopper is really shopping the store more frequently with more fill-in and immediate need trips, the reality going forward today is that the retailer's got to decide, how do I make that transaction, that individual trip, more productive for the shopper? How do I drive her return on the time that she's invested in the store? And so we're seeing at WestRock a significant movement among many of our customers to start thinking not just about trip types. And part of that is because most trip types today are fill in an immediate need. So not think about so much about trip types, but to think about trip purposes. And trip purposes today are really moving much closer to things like occasions. And how can I think about what it is precisely that I'm trying to solve? Today, merchandising has to answer a really fundamental question for shoppers. And that is, what is the problem you are trying to solve for them? And that problem might be indulgence. I'm looking for indulgence, or I'm looking for a treasure hunt. But in many cases, they're trying to solve something that's reasonably practical. What's for dinner tonight? How am I going to clean my room? That kind of thing. And so the need for multi-vendor sources sorts of solutions in stores, multi-category end cap kinds of solutions that really drive that differentiation. And I think that's the second part I would say is really change for shoppers. They're really looking at retailers to drive something unique for them. No longer are they willing to say, well, I could go to this place or that place, and there are many of the trade-offs. They're looking for each retailer to be distinct, in effect, in the portfolio of retailers that shopper shops at. And so that retailer has to stand for something. In our view at WestRock, merchandising is going to matter a lot more in the degree to which that store is going to be able to deliver productivity, is going to be to deliver, in effect, comp growth. That merchandising has to work harder, and it has to drive that focus on differentiation. How does the merchandising make the retailer largely come to life? So for the retailer, it's about conversion and how do I drive productivity in the store. And for the shopper, it's really about convenience. How do I drive convenience? And of course, do it in a way that drives differentiation so the shopper says, hey, not only do I know why I shop here, but that retailer really knows who I am and really can identify with the sorts of issues that I'm trying to resolve for my own household as I'm doing my shopping. So it's much better alignment today with the shopper amongst the store base that is out there today. It's interesting. If you think back just a few years ago, you would have seen people talking about the digital and physical divide. And there's this great chasm, this building chasm in the industry. Today, that isn't the narrative at all. Today, what you hear much more is the synergies that exist between digital and physical, really what you might think of as the convergence of digital and physical. I'll give you some examples. First, I think most prominently is the growth of buy online, pick up in store, click and collect sorts of initiatives, where retailers are really realizing that the shopper wants the convenience and the predictability of knowing they can pull up to the store, pick up their groceries or whatever items that they've ordered, and then leave. More on their timing, on their terms. It really reinforces the convenience and shopper orientation. So that's one area. But really what can get missed in this environment is the degree to which digital is really moving into the store as well. In some ways we can think about this as, well, you see an increase in screens and things of that sort. But where we see the real opportunity and the real resurgence of growth in retail, and it's an area that WestRock is significantly involved in, is in the area of much more dynamic digital engagement with the shopper in the store. So that might mean, for example, a display that changes its messaging on the screen depending upon whether, say, it's 100 degrees outside or 5 degrees below zero. You certainly may want to message the consumer differently. So responding differently to things like that, weather or geographic variables. Another one might be where if a shopper who walks by that display is, say, a 25-year-old male versus a 75-year-old female. You have technology today that can identify that shopper and really respond to her personally and give her a more customized message that might be more appropriate for who that person is. The interaction with mobile devices today has moved considerably forward. The capacity to scan a product, the packaging itself, and what we at WestRock call connected packaging. The capability of scanning that product and then having the experience in effect move onto the mobile device, where at that point it can be customized, it can be personalized, and it can be contextualized, because now I can treat you differently based upon the fact that you may be in a store or not in a store, or whether or not you have a particular, say, Facebook profile. And then the other way is around more passive engagement with the shopper. The shopper walks into the store, a beacon might identify that person, might identify them, and passively start sending messaging onto their mobile device that is more appropriate for them, say on that particular shopping occasion, or maybe the day part, or maybe that person's shopper profile based upon the shopper data that is there. Our view today is that this environment of more what we call digital activation in the store is moving past the point that we used to say was more around, we'll say, experimentation. And we are now moving, I think, into a new phase, that of implementation. And that today, a number of retailers are partnering with key suppliers and working through many times with WestRock to be able to activate now this new capability in stores. It's no longer kind of trial and test it out and see how things are going. We're starting to see key retailers and suppliers move, I think, to scale. I think the issue going forward is going to be there's going to be greater risk in not investing in this area, not investing than in saying, well, we're going to wait and see. That the risk is really going to be in standing by the sidelines and not ultimately being a part of all of this. Because I will say, our view is that the growth in this area is going to be substantial. This is going to represent a manifestation of much more data coming into the ecosystems of a lot of retailers and manufacturers. And just like in the revolution that happened back in the late 80s, early 90s around scanner data, this is now going to be a new influx of data sources coming across this ecosystem of connected displays and connected packaging and connected stores that's really going to provide a lot more information for targeting and the capacity to measure and to be much more precise and targeted to this shopper who wants to be spoken to as a person. I think that's really the promise of digital activation, and I think we're right on the cusp of a new phase of really implementation of this new phase of merchandising. I think the arc of merchandising now is moving digital. I believe that the growth in e-commerce today in many ways is coming from this growth in buying online and picking it up in the store. And many retailers, I think, have acknowledged this, and they're making significant investments in this area. I think the next phase, though, now that you've got shoppers really adopting this method of acquiring their grocery purchases, I think the next phase here over the next couple of years, we're going to see this really come into focus is, how do I get that shopper to now make incremental purchases? You know, they're shopping me more often. They're making additional trips to the store. Again, how do I drive that transaction size? And so I think impulse now moves to two places. First is on that mobile device or in front of your screen when you're doing the order. So if I'm ordering half a dozen things, algorithmically, okay, the app or the website ought to be able to tell me, hey, based upon your past purchasing behavior or based upon the sorts of things that you're buying together here, or I don't know, based upon the temperature outside or the pollen count or something like that, you might also want these other things and have those things be smart as versus just saying, well, maybe other people bought these things. No, wait a second. Someone like you who meets your profile and all that, and just getting closer and closer to offering you an assortment that is so much more curated for you. I think impulse moves there. But the other place that I think is today perhaps not as well focused upon is a new point of impulse moves to the store. And that the point of pickup at the store, whether it's a pickup desk or whether it's a separate counter or even outside at a tower, that now becomes a new point for incremental merchandising. Think about it like this as an example. If it's 4:30 in the afternoon and someone is driving home and picking up the half a dozen items of grocery at their local retailer, and it's 4:30, and the retailer knows, of course, through the app that this is say a mom with 3 kids and all that. That's the perfect opportunity to have outside there at the pickup station, say a container with a warmed up oven, in effect, to keep something warm, and to offer me, say, $5 pizzas, $10 pizzas while I'm out there, along with some carbonated soft drinks, perhaps, and perhaps some salty snacks, and maybe even a dessert right there when mom is there. So this notion of now merchandising anew to the shopper where she is. You used to encourage impulse purchasing at that final moment of transaction, which was at the register. Well, if the register, in effect, is now moving outside of the store, then merchandising has got to move out there too. Or if the register is going to happen at a pickup counter, if I'm going to order a TV and it's Super Bowl weekend, for example, that's a great opportunity to say to me, hey, did you know we have beer, chips, soda, and these other things, and maybe to have a dedicated display over you that rotates, that is more oriented now toward, again, meeting that shopper's trip purpose, okay, and that occasion-based solution. So I think we're going to see better merchandising now focused at that point of pickup, even as we see better impulse merchandising online. I think a lot of that's going to move into the store as that new point of pickup now becomes a new point of impulse merchandising. I think collaboration going forward is going to be more important than ever, and I'll just give you a few examples of how I think that could happen more fruitfully. The first one is with the advent of new digital technologies that are out there today to drive the merchandising of the future, the opportunity for manufacturers and retailers and other third-party suppliers to collaborate on new endeavors to attract the shopper, engage the shopper when she's there, measure the impact, and have that be a real feedback loop, measurement being critically important to this. I think that's really an important way of collaboration. Getting into the game, getting into that swimming pool, starting to swim, and seeing what digital in the store can do to drive greater lift off display. I think that's one really important way. The second, I think, is merchandising that today moves to a new level. It's no longer sort of displaying it there and kind of hoping it all works out, or setting it up there because you know it's on sale or something like that, but really having merchandising that moves from selling a product, selling a brand, to merchandising that sells the banner. To the degree that the retailer has its own equity and has its own taglines and its own strategies and its own go-to-market approach, then merchandising that in effect uses the brand to sell the broader store's banner strategy, I think that's going to be more important going forward. And I think retailers are really going to be looking for much more differentiated merchandising that reflects the retailer's equity. Third, I would say, is private label co-merchandising. I think as retailers place an even greater emphasis on private label, and these private labels become more sophisticated and exist in tiers across categories, the opportunity for co-merchandising, co-marketing with the private label. In many cases, those are going to be private labels outside of the category you're in, so it's going to require a lot more integration across merchandising departments at retailers. But I think the payoffs are going to be worth it for the shopper in many cases, who's now going to have that much more differentiated, integrated solution. And then the fourth and final way that I would say is something that suppliers certainly should be looking at in working with retailers is, how do I align with that retailer's more particular and more urgent need for a sustainability solution? Going forward, I think retailers are recognizing that they have a lot of packaging in the store, and in many cases now shoppers are going to be judging them upon the kind of packaging that they have, and whether it is recyclable, whether it is something that is at least considered to be a sustainable packaging that reflects in some ways the values that this shopper has. So it's not just that they're shopping at a particular retailer because the retailer represents those values, is how do those values manifest themselves in terms of the packaging itself? And so the movement to more fiber-based sorts of packaging, I think, is going to be really important, but important to align with each individual retailer so that manufacturers can recognize the benefits of this very important, we'll call it broader, more society-wide initiative, but do it in a way that aligns with each retailer's more particular go-to-market approach, because sustainability today, I think, has become no longer something that people can just sort of, wave at or, sort of point to as, something that they're doing off to the side. I think sustainability today has moved to front and center to be more strategic. And I think that packaging and merchandising today, therefore, is at front and center of a more collaborative merchandising strategy. So those would be the ways that I think suppliers and retailers can work more closely together. It's perhaps a tall order in 2019, but and into 2020, but I think the results will be worth it.